Good morning. This is chart of the week, and today we're looking at the US GDP growth quarter on quarter. We do that because we had the GDP growth for Q2 coming out yesterday, and it was an impressive 3% growth. Or that is what the media told us. If we look into it, the situation may, however, be somewhat different. What if the situation actually was that instead of having had a negative growth of 0.5% here in Q1 of 2025, we had a growth of 4.29, and we actually had a negative growth in the second quarter of 1.8%. Now, why I'm saying that? Well, I do that because if we look to the distortion of the tariffs, then it becomes quite clear that the situation is not as straightforward. We know how GDP is consists of consumption, investments, public consumption, and net exports. And if we have a situation where the net exports becomes quite large or quite negative, well, then it will skew the numbers. And that is exactly the situation we saw in Q1. Because of the tariffs, we saw a lot of the US businesses actually front-running this and importing a lot of goods from Europe and elsewhere to avoid the tariffs. And that actually gave us a negative impact on GDP by 4.6%. Now, this time in Q2, we actually saw that we had a positive of 4.99%. Why? Because US companies were no longer importing as much as they were because they have been front-running and front-loading that in Q1. So if we simply normalize for that and say, what is the growth over these two quarters? Well, actually, then we can see that the net export growth in Q1, Q2 on an average was plus 0.19%. And if we then deduct that big export contribution here from the latest numbers that we saw, well, then we get into the negative, and we actually then also have to add, of course, the 0.19%. That would actually give us a real growth in Q2 of minus 1.8% and a real growth in Q1 of 4.29%. And more interestingly, if we look at the investments here, they actually were very negative in Q2. This is private companies not investing to the degree that they have done in previous quarters. So something tells us here that the growth that we saw in Q1 and Q2 may have been skewed, and maybe we actually had different kind of growth levels than what we saw, what has been coming out from the media. Maybe it was negative, or at least much lower than what we were presented with, the growth rate of 3%. That's all for now, and I'll be back next time.